Let me begin by first offering my sincere condolences to the royal family and the people of Thailand on the passing of the late king, the Bhumibol, last year. Today, I would like to share how Japan's post-war policies sought to achieve an inclusive society by building a strong social welfare state and universal health coverage. Actually, we had two approaches. One is the right-based approach, and the other is an ideological and political approach. This is the roots of our rights-based approach. Article 25 of our Constitution, under the democracy in 1947, shows that all people shall have the right to maintain the minimum standards of wholesome and cultured living, and in all shares of life, and the state shall use its endeavors for the promotion and extension of the social welfare and security and of the public health. Clearly identify the role of government to take the very important role to attend. I have to say that the ideological and the political approach then, right after the World War II ended, remember that the Cold War happened, and the Korean Peninsula, the real military battle happened, and divided the countries emerged. And the Communist Party successfully created the communist regime in China. And then the Japanese was not immune from such revolutionary forces either. And as a matter of fact, Japan's Socialist Party finally achieved to have their own cabinet in 1947. The Japanese conservative politicians get a bit worried about those the political tendencies under the increasing socialist power, and then thought how to strengthen their own power basis under the democratic system. And they noticed the potential the middle-class society can be the basis of the Conservative Party power politics. And then they have incentives to create healthy and well-educated middle-class society as a target of their own policy to build up the social welfare, the state in Japan under the democratic system. This is the package. This slide shows the framework of the multi-sectoral policy, the package, implemented by the conservative government to create and expand the healthy middle class. In 1960, the government announced an income doubling plan, and that would double the income of all students in 10 years. And it also introduced a progressive income tax reform that imposed up to 70% for the wealthy population. And then various social safety nets, including public pension system and an unemployment insurance system, as well as the universal health coverage. Those policies are the part of the package of our own national policies to produce the healthy and well-educated middle-class society. But we did realize still remaining populations, the most the socially vulnerable people. And then they are able to build several laws passed shortly after the war to ensure that the vulnerable populations were not left behind. The Public Assistance Act of 1946 expanded the PRIVA efforts to guarantee a minimum standard of living and promote self-sufficiency for all citizens by offering assistance for the livelihood, the medical care, and maternal, etc. This is also the policy package for the socially vulnerable people based on the legal framework of the Public Assistance Act. But we also noticed that the most vulnerable population, there are disabled persons. Therefore, shortly after that, the Child Welfare Act and Act of Welfare of Physically Disabled Persons were passed to further strengthen the safety nets for vulnerable populations. And then those two legal frameworks, Public Assistance Act and Act on Welfare of Physically Disabled Persons, could cover the vulnerable population in Japan by using 100% taxpayers' money. And then we finally achieved the universal health coverage in 1961, just before we had the wonderful age of the economic growth in 1960s and 1970s. This is my favorite graph. This shows Japan's initial Gini coefficient. Look at the 1960s and 1970s and the Japanese economic growth. We could have successfully declined this graph of the Gini coefficient, which means even under the economic growth age, we could successfully reduce the gap between the rich and poor. Now so many countries enjoy a really consistent economic growth, but unfortunately most of the countries are facing various serious increasing gap between the rich and poor. But in Japan, that sort of things did not happen because the government previously had successfully created the function of the redistribution and shift the financial resources from rich to poor through the government mechanism. And then this slide. And also I have to say that the function of the universal health insurance system, the primary goal of the health insurance was to ensure the access to adequate health services without financial hardship, but it also contributed to income redistribution. Can you imagine? More than 70% of the government function to redistribute financial resources from rich to poor relied on universal health insurance system. At that time, Japan's per capita income was only $4,120 US. We did not have such a rich person like Bill Gates. So even though we increased the proportionate rate of the income tax, doesn't make any sense to redistribute. And that time we did not have such a large size of the elderly population. Even though we achieved the universal pension system, this pension system had any real function to redistribute the financial resources from rich to poor. However, universal health insurance system has the decisively important role to redistribute financial resources from rich to poor. This means universal health insurance as a part of the universal health coverage means not only for health, but also create the really healthy, the middle-class society and stabilize the society politically as well. Look at this graph, especially in the 1960s and 1970s. Most of the Japanese people recognize themselves belongs to the middle class. This is the wonderful achievement of the policy package to do that. And then, quite fortunately, my party, LDP, could enjoy having a large years to occupy the powerful position at the both houses, based on the support from those stable middle-class society. This is the wonderful success. However, now, this graph shows the correlation between the two economic situations and the number of recipients of the public assistance. As well as the Japanese economy consistently enjoyed the growth, always we could successfully reduce the size of the recipient of those the public assistance, but hit the bottom in 1995, and then rapidly increased the size of the recipient of the public assistance because of the economic fragmentation, because of the larger size of the budget deficit, and also the increasing the segment of the contract-based workers. It also reflects the vulnerable population, rapidly growing number of elderly citizens. Look at this graph. Now, 43.5% of the recipient of the public assistance shared by the elderly population over 65 years old. The aging is a really serious subject when we talk about how to achieve the universal health coverage. No one left behind. And I can tell you, this is not only happened in Japan. I'm quite sure many other Asian countries are facing the same situations within the foreseeable future. This graph shows the speed of aging. The first wave of aging started in Europe around 1940s. In Asia, second wave happened, but only in Japan. But the speed of aging was speedier than the European speed of aging. However, second wave of aging started in Asia. A third wave of aging started in Asia around 2000. Taiwan started in 1993, and Korea and Singapore started in 1999. But the speed of aging to be an aged society, Singapore took only 18 years, much more speedy than the speed of aging of Japan. South Korea, 20 years, Thailand, 20 years, China, 23 years, Sri Lanka, 20 years. And the fourth wave is coming from now to 2020. Vietnam has just started to get into the aging society, but only 18 years to be an aged society. Many Asian countries, before they are achieving the universal health coverage, they are having larger size of the elderly population. Needs of the long-term care services are growing simultaneously. In case of Japan, very lucky we had 40 years to prepare for aging. In 1961, we could achieve the universal health coverage and simultaneously achieve the universal health pension system. In the 1980s, we started to specify the policy for elderly population under the name of Gold Plan, the new Gold Plan. And in 2000, we finally introduced long-term care insurance. And then we faced into the very speedy aging. But we could have 40 years to prepare for it. But in Asia, you don't have such long years to prepare for it. And before achieving the universal health coverage, how you can simultaneously cope with the increasing elderly population and achieve the universal health systems without no one left behind. And then I can tell you, the aging issues, most of the policymakers recognize the domestic issues, but the aging is no more only a domestic issue. Aging become a very serious common agenda in Asia as a whole. How we can do it. The Japanese government now thinking to publicize the initiative for Asian health and human well-being. It is now drafting because Japan is the most responsible and advanced aging society. I really hope that most of the policymakers in Asia noticed it and create the really efficient networks in Asia and cope with the aging issues while we are achieving universal health coverage, no one left behind. Thank you very much.